Hi, I'm Peter Tragos, host of the Lawyer You Know podcast and YouTube channel. The saying goes, everyone hates lawyers until you need one. Well, I'm here when you need one to answer your questions and give you insight that you didn't know you needed. Along with my partners, Pete Sardis, the professor, who has a finance and business background, and George Tragos, my dad, and the consigliere, a criminal defense giant, we can answer any questions you have. What's up, everybody? We are here talking about something other than Johnny Depp. And the case we're talking about today is the Dan Markel murder trial, which was a retrial that happened in Tallahassee over the last 2 weeks. He is a former law professor at Florida State University College of Law, and he was murdered literally in his driveway, in his garage. And it seems as if it was a hit for hire. They have convicted the two men that drove there and actually pulled the trigger, but they have been working on convicting all of the co-conspirators. And the first one is Kate Magbanua, who is the connecting piece between the shooters and the Adelson family, which is Dan Markel's ex-wife's family, so his in-laws. And the main culprit seems to be Charles Adelson, who has been arrested or indicted for murder and conspiracy to commit murder and hire a hitman for murder in Tallahassee as well. But he is awaiting trial. And this trial of Kate Magbanua, we're just going to call her Kate M. The trial for Kate M happened at the same time as one of the shooters prior, and it resulted in a hung jury. So they have retried her over the last 2 weeks, but they do have some new evidence in the case. They do have some new things popping up in the case, and she testified at her first trial. And as we know, any prior statements can be used against you, and you can be impeached with those prior statements. So on today's video, we're going to break down what was different about this trial than the last one, and not just the end result, which we will get to at the end of the video as well. But it was a very interesting trial. A lot of moving parts, and it could have a major effect on what Charles Adelson decides to do in his case. That is the most interesting trial, what I'm most looking forward to seeing if they end up trying him and convicting him for his part in this murder that was at least alleged at this point. So if you haven't hit the like button already, hit the like button on this video. If you haven't subscribed to our page, go ahead and subscribe, because we are going to be hitting some new topics or different topics than just Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And today is one of those topics. So when talking about this trial, she was tried the first time and it was a hung jury. They convicted the shooter, but they did not convict her. And instead of just letting her walk or coming to some kind of plea deal, it was an all or nothing type of situation, and they decided to retry her. One of the main pieces of evidence that came out during this trial was some enhanced undercover FBI wiretap conversations between Kate M and Charlie Adelson. And the reason that they think she is the connection between the Adelson family and the shooters is because she was a past girlfriend of Charlie Adelson and a wife or mother of the children of one of the shooters. So she seems like a clear connector. But what evidence do they have that she was a connection? Well, she made thousands of dollars, a lot of it in cash, from Charlie Adelson as his personal assistant or rent collector on some of his properties or working in his dental office. But it turns out she really didn't do much work. And in these undercover wiretapped conversations, they are very, very clearly talking about the murder of Dan Markel. They reference how if the FBI had any evidence, they would already be at the airport. If they had anything, they would already arrest them. If they knew that some guy just walked up to somebody in his driveway and shot him, things would be different. Who are they going to believe, a gang member or an oral surgeon? All sorts of discussions that make it very clear as to what they're talking about. And it lets the jury know, and the jury could infer from these conversations that Charlie Adelson and Kate M were absolutely involved in this case. And nothing really directly connects them to the gun, or they both have alibis. They weren't there. Just like Wendy Adelson, who is Dan Markel's ex-wife, she was not there. She has an alibi, but is there a connection here? And it's interesting to see who testified against Kate M. One of the shooters points the finger at her as delivering the money to them and paying them. They also know that say that Charlie Adelson was involved. Kate M calls them a liar. Kate M denies any involvement. Kate M says she didn't know anything that happened she didn't know anything about this murder until the arrests were actually made in 2016. And we'll get to why that's interesting later. But another person that testified against her testified for the state, I should say, is Wendy Adelson herself, Dan Markel's ex-wife, who said, no, she wasn't complaining about him all the time. She didn't tell her family to kill him. She does want the killers brought to justice, even if it is some of her family members. That's what she wants out of all this. She doesn't necessarily know who was involved. She doesn't know if her family was involved. She doesn't know that Kate M is necessarily involved. And the defense attorneys were saying, this is all your fault. Didn't you say you wanted this? Didn't you always complain to your family about it? Didn't you force their hand, basically, which is kind of weird, intimating the family when Kate M is a clear connector to her family and the shooters. So then when we get to why it's so important that this is a second trial or a retrial, the state has her entire testimony the first time around to pick apart. And they did. They brought a lot of inconsistencies. They knew it was happening. And one of the big ones was that she didn't know anything about this murder until 2016 in May. However, these recorded undercover FBI conversations were prior to May of 2016. So they play these recordings. She denies that it has anything to do with the murders, but if the jury thinks that these do have something to do with the murders, she's clearly lying about knowing nothing about the murder, I should say, prior to May of 2016. And if the jury does infer that these conversations were, even though they're vague and kind of cryptic, if they think they were about the murder, then they've caught her in a huge lie. And if she's lying about that, that's a good way to sink your defense case. There are some comments about how Adelson joked about hiring a hitman, about how he always carried cash a certain way. And that's the way that these hitmen were paid, cash stapled together. And so after, I think it was 9 days total, including jury selection, which took a couple days because it's a high profile case. After the jury got all the evidence, including some of the new evidence, and this time she wasn't being tried with anybody else, it was just her. The jury took 8 hours to deliberate and ended up convicting her on murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation, a hitman for hire. So she was convicted as the go-between between the Adelson family and the shooters. What's interesting about this is just because she was convicted as the go-between or the connector doesn't necessarily mean that Charlie Adelson will get convicted. But it definitely doesn't look good because at this point, the jury thinks that there was a go-between between the in-laws or somebody. I mean, Charlie Adelson's the one on the FBI tapes and the shooter. So now the shooter and the driver and the connector have all been convicted of Dan Markel's murder. So we're 3/4 of the way to justice. But who called the shot? Who paid the money? Who started the ball rolling? Because it wasn't these two gang members that were hitmen that did it for money. It wasn't Kate M, who didn't care about Dan Markel. But what connection does she have to the case? It was a messy divorce. The Adelsons, the in-laws, apparently hated Dan Markel, and he was it was a big custody battle over the kids. And the Adelson family is a rich and powerful family in South Florida. The only connector to these shooters is Kate M, who is a former girlfriend of Charlie Adelson. So all the dots are getting connected. And this is really just a step towards the trial and the hopeful conviction of Charlie Adelson if he was in fact involved. But the jury did not take long this time on the retrial to convict her on all charges. So the evidence seems to be mounting. And now that they have these convictions, will everybody flip on Charlie Adelson to get a deal? Will Kate M flip to try to get a better sentence and testify against Charlie Adelson because her sentencing is down the road? So we're going to follow along and see that. Charlie Adelson, is he going to take a deal now that he sees Kate M has been convicted and the shooters have been convicted? This is how a conspiracy to commit murder and a murder or a hitman for hire, this is how the case progresses. This is how it goes. They have to go one step at a time. And it's usually better for the state to go one step at a time because then people start flipping on each other, especially usually the hitmen for hire, which one of them actually testifies for Kate M. And I think is going to testify for Charlie Adelson unless he flips on him, that they weren't involved, which is kind of a plot twist. You would think they would just, flip on people to save their own skin. So there's a lot of moving parts, but the state did a great job in this case. They put the screws to Kate M on cross-examination. They did a great job with the new information that they had, made sure it was getting played. It was interesting because the judge would not allow the actual transcript to be played for the jury. The jury had to listen with their own ears. And all reports out of the courtroom were that they were closing their eyes. They all had individual headphones and they were listening very closely. And because that's evidence, they could listen to it during deliberation as well. And I think those recordings were so damning and impeaching to Kate M's testimony that that's the real reason she was convicted. And if they convicted her as one of the two people on those recordings, it's not looking good for Charlie Adelson. So we'll have to keep following this case and see if the dots continue to be connected and if Charlie Adelson eventually gets convicted. So let me know in the comments you're interested in this case. If you have any questions about how this trial went, anything specifically, let me know. But the main focus is going to be Charlie Adelson's case and whether or not he gets convicted or takes a deal and what the sentences of everybody ends up being at the end if anybody ends up flipping on Charlie Adelson. So thanks for joining me today for a different topic. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments and we'll be back with you next time. Thanks for watching this episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you like this content, please share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to our page and like our videos. If you want some interaction, get in the comments and we'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to know any more information about our firm or this page, you can find out in the description or visit tragoslaw.com. We post multiple times throughout the week, so make sure you hit that bell so you can get the notification and not miss out on the next episode.